Howdy, folks. Uncle Bill here from DeadPit Radio, and I wanted to do a video that was somewhat different than all the other videos that I've done. And the fact that it's not really about lists or anything like that as much as it is just my opinion about something and bringing around an idea that I'd had for a long time about one of these videos because something just doesn't feel right about the current state of my beloved horror genre. So I feel like that this is more of an op-ed piece. It'll probably get a lot of shit, and it really doesn't matter. I feel like, all these shows are really opinion pieces anyway, so this is just a continuation of that. But this video is going to be about Dawn of the Dead 1978, George Romero, and specifically kind of how that movie in particular and how Romero's, kind of ethos really resonates more today than it did in 1978 when the movie was made. Just for everybody to know, I'm not talking about the Dawn of the Dead remake. Please do not get that confused with what I'm getting ready to talk about. But Dawn of the Dead 1978, more than anything else, uh, was a splatter film based around a really great, unique concept for a horror film, which was consumerism. The whole point of Dawn of the Dead is the mall, and the mall itself kind of symbolizes just humanity and society's kind of rampant consumerism at that time as Romero saw it. I would go, as far to say that now that's gotten 1,000 times more out of hand just because of the digital age and the ease that there is to buy products online now. I would say that you're much more likely to go into debt now than you were in 1978. I don't know the numbers on that, haven't looked them up. I'd say that's true. I'd say there's probably far more people with credit card debt, medical debt, home debt, stuff like that than there was in 1978. That being said, I can only relate these videos to things that I know something about, that I've kind of seen personally, within the horror community. And I'm going to relate, this video in particular to this physical media craze that's been going on. I'm a part of that. I love physical media. I don't think I'm as much of a part of it as a lot of people who buy like a lot of physical media. But physical media, for people that aren't familiar, are Blu-rays, 4Ks, DVDs, VHS to some degree, and any other thing that you can, physically own and hold in your hand. Now, within, I'd say, the past 10 years, um, there has been like a giant kind of boom of collectors collecting these things. When we first started doing the DeadPit Radio show in 2005, physical media existed, and that was pretty much all you had. You didn't have the streaming services like you had now. It was more so you had to have kind of thing. You had to buy these films physically to watch them. Now you could watch any of this stuff streaming, you know, online via any of like a million different platforms on the internet. So why is there still, like with vinyl and records, this huge kind of cult of people that buy physical media? Now, the easiest answer to that is that there are people out there that enjoy owning something and don't want their, movies to be censored and want the best possible version of the movie that they can own. Because as anybody that knows, streaming services don't have the highest quality. The quality of physical media is much greater, and you don't have to worry about the movie being censored later on by Disney or somebody like that. So, with all that being said, there's another group um, that aren't really concerned or don't seem to be concerned with watching the movies or um, owning the movies as much as they are with competing with other people. So this is where Dawn of the Dead comes in pretty handy, right? Dawn of the Dead was a warning to people. We're talking a warning to people that is now 40, Jesus Christ, 46 years old. Um, it was a warning in and of the fact that people don't even really know why they're buying the things that they are. There's a whole subplot in the movie where they're trying to figure out, why are all these zombies coming back to this mall when they don't know we're even in here anymore? They weren't, the idea was they weren't coming to the mall for the people. They were coming to the mall because it was just something that they remembered. They wanted to buy things, but they didn't know why they wanted to buy things. They just wanted to buy, consume, both consume the people in the mall and consume, the stuff in the mall. I have a feeling that a lot of people now in a lot of these circles don't even know why they're buying a lot of the things that they're buying. So I'm going to offer my 2 cent analysis of why this stuff is going on and why this has gotten so popular now that you've got, 20 different independent labels that are distributing films and physical media now and making a fortune doing it. So we're talking about, you've got at this point Vinegar Syndrome. Just a short list off the top of my head: Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, Synapse, um, Blue Underground, Arrow, um, Massacre, Terrorvision, um, and then you got all your major studio companies. But most of these other ones that I mentioned are boutique labels too. And they're all, selling out left and right with these 10,000 to, 5 to 10,000 copies of some of these really obscure movies. So, part of this to me is, a concept called competitive consumerism. Now, competitive consumerism has been around for as long as consumerism has been around. But there's a difference between buying something you want and buying something that you need. So this is where the idea of consumerism comes in, first of all. So, buying something you need would be food. Buying something that you want would be a Blu-ray. But we're at the point now where, when you were a kid, when I was a kid in the 90s, if you wanted to, buy something to compete with somebody, people bought baseball cards, they bought comic books, they bought things like that, and you were like, "Hey, check out what I got." In that context, you maybe had 3 or 4 friends that would come over and they would be blown away by whatever, new things that you had. Nowadays, with streaming becoming as popular as it is, you've got thousands of people who you can have get eyes on something that you have that they don't. And with that, there's this competition between all of these different people, and a lot of times between the people that watch, their content. It's a whole lot different now because, like, back then there's a few people, but now there's thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands of people, depending on the channel. So why, when you think about it, why would you buy unnecessary things like constantly? And, there's a whole bunch of different possible reasons for this, but unnecessary things convey social status more so than necessary things, right? So, in other words, the more things I have that I don't need, the higher my social status is, the bigger that one would look, I guess. So, your status goes up by how much crap you can buy, is the easiest way that I can put it. And uh if you're looking for that, if you're looking for social status, most people are, if they want to admit it or not. Um, there's an easy way to get it, which is spend money. So, and this is something that I've been really, saying since we first started doing the show. You don't have to have a personality. You don't have to have a message. A lot of these, you know, things, you just have to have money. And if you have money, you can buy unnecessary things. And if you have enough unnecessary things, then you have status. It's easy. And that part of it is really, really easy. And you look, at what he's warning us about and what Romero's warning us about in Dawn of the Dead, which is like they've got everything in the world that they could ever want, right? But they can't let it go. It's not enough. Like at the end, you know, they end up destroying themselves because they can't let go of these things that they don't even need anymore. They never needed to begin with. Um, Another thing that I think happened around COVID was a lot of people lost a sense of control over their lives and what they could do. It was almost like, people were, the government's telling you what to do and what not to do. You can't go outside. You can't do this. You can't do that. And losing that sense of control has real psychological consequences because people desperately try to cling to a sense of control. And one of the ways you can control is to own something, to own things. Um, it's weird because you would think during a recession or an emergency or something like COVID, like spending would go down, but it always goes up. People always spend more money when they're in a panic or when they're, in a recession, which is kind of like a panic in a lot of ways economically. Um, and it's the feeling of control and the temporary sense of well-being that you get when you buy something and you are in charge of that thing. You own it, you buy it, you're in charge of it. There's that fleeting sense of like dopamine and pleasure, and then that's gone and it has to be replaced immediately. So in that way, it's kind of like any other kind of addiction, really. Like you have to replace it with doing the same thing like over and over and over again to get that feeling back. I think that greatly increased after COVID too. And just the uncertainty of how things were. Um, Another possible thing that's going on too, and I think that this is touched upon quite a bit in Dawn of the Dead, the original, because the idea of the whole identity of the people is connected to that mall. Or you could look at it like the whole identity of those people, or those dead people, reanimated people, is connected to consuming. Um, I think that, like I said, that's been the case for decades now. Um, and the interesting thing about that is that it's a kind of an identity, right? So a collector is an identity. If you don't really have an identity, a stable one anyway, not one that's like all over the place. You don't really know who you are, in other words, then if you want to get into that, you want to buy enough stuff, you can be a collector. And with that collector, you're kind of forming like your own social identity that now you can transmit that out to thousands of other people who have the same identity, and you'll get like feedback about, how you're doing the right thing, or that there are people that have common interests as you, I should say, I guess, more so than doing the right thing. There's a lot of value in that, and there's a lot of danger in that, and there's a lot of just red flags about that too. But, one of the things that I find interesting about having that kind of identity too is that um you essentially are getting along better with things than you are people at some point. So, you're collecting things, you're kinda harvesting things, you're relating to things, and the more and more that that goes along, the less and less I think that there's a need to to relate to people, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there's a desperate need to relate to people, but it's being filled by this relationship with things, with anything. I mean, this, like I said, is not necessarily connected to just movies or Blu-rays or shit like that, but it could be anything. It could be cars, it could be, you know, sports memorabilia, it could be technology, it could be anything. But I do think to some degree or another, it's a replacement for wanting to relate to people, but maybe not knowing how to do so that well. So you relate more to things. And this is a pretty common thing, by the way. You see this a lot with people that are only child. Uh, it's something that I think was underlying to in Dawn of the Dead, which is, it's very easy to get carried away with all these different things. And then the communication between the people is just falling apart around you. I don't know if specifically Romero was wanting to make that statement, but it does ring true in the movie because like the relationships between everyone in the movie are falling apart as they get more and more things, which there's no connection, by the way, between the amount of things you have and technology versus how happy you are. Like if you could look at a line chart, right? And the amount of if the amount of things you had went up and the amount of technology went up, like the greater technology gets, then what you would see is a straight line for happiness that would just go through. It might even dip a little bit, but it would normally be pretty like straight. There's no correlation between those things. Um, and I know this is a pretty fucking offbeat video for me to do, but there's been several people that have put out videos recently, and I'm not going to name any names that um let's just say we're struggling with purchasing and buying things and stuff like that, and it just got me to think like some of this stuff is happening and I don't think people really know why it's happening. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that I haven't even considered too about why it's happening. These are just some thoughts that I had like off the cuff that I thought that I would bring up too. Um, but there's also more so than anything else in this too. There's a nostalgia connected to buying things. It's always been there. It's in our subconscious, like, you've always bought things through your entire life when you were a kid, you go to the store, you buy things, your parents buy you things. It's connected to something in your brain that's enjoyable and pleasurable, and you seek it, even if you don't know why you seek it, but there's a real danger in that getting out of hand really quickly too. Um, there's a real danger to, the not understanding what's going on in your life and like why you're doing these things and connecting all these different kind of concepts. And hopefully through this, like, I guess my hope is that somebody will see um themselves in that, and maybe like maybe think about what it is that they're doing, the reason why that they're doing what they're doing. Because I think if you continue on without having kind of any insight into what's going on, you're just like one of those zombies, kind of like ambling up to the shopping mall. You don't know, you're just banging on the door. You don't know why you're there. You don't know, what's going on. And you just keep buying and buying and buying. And then that doesn't fill up, whatever it is you're trying to fill up. So yeah. And that way I think that I'm defending two different things here. I'm defending that movie, which I think for some reason has gotten a lot of like really undue hatred over the years. I'm not sure why, because it's genius in so many different ways to me. And like on so many different levels, that movie it hits me, in different ways. So I'm defending the movie itself in of the message that it's having too. And I think I'm also kind of trying to defend like having an understanding of what you're doing and not just blanketly doing things for other people and their appraisal and their approval, which I see constantly now, and I feel like it's such a dangerous kinda thing for people to do. The state that we're in maybe sometimes, like, those brief glimpses of, like, hope and that jolt of dopamine that you get when you buy, a 4K or something like that, may be better than just nothing at all too. I mean, competitive consumerism, the idea there's always a feeling of disappointment with it is part of the problem, but it may be better than nothing at all. So in other words, if you're going through life and you don't have any real senses of, like, how to obtain those kind of feelings through other people or other kinda outlets, and that gives you that sense, you'll notice there's always a sense of disappointment connected to it because it's giving you a kind of it's a fake sense of what you want. It's the same thing you want. You want that feeling, but you're getting it through something that you know you can't sustain it. You have to keep going and buying and buying and buying and buying and buying to get that feeling back. There's a real meaninglessness in that too. Um, yeah. So, go back and if you get a chance, watch Dawn of the Dead, but watch it not as like a splatter film, which it is great at, a splatter kind of zombie film, which it is great at, but watch it as like a case study of a group of people that kind of get everything that they want, buy everything that they want, um, take over in this kind of consumeristic way and displace all these people, in this way. They take all this stuff over, but there's just an emptiness to it, and it eventually like costs them everything. Watch it as a social study, I guess I should say, rather than as like a splatter film. And I think people get a lot more enjoyment and relevance out of that movie watching it that way than, as just like the machete in the head kind of stuff. Um, all that being said too, I can't help but bring this up that Romero was a genius. And sometimes I wonder, why like so many people connect to Romero so much more than the other big directors. But I think it was because like he definitely had his finger on the pulse of more along like the working class underlying kind of pathology of that than any of the other directors, like, because they just didn't know. I mean, he's from Pittsburgh. A lot of these other guys, I think most of them other guys are from, California or, yeah, New York, bigger cities, things like that. And when you look at a lot of his films now, it's not the zombies really that draw me to those films. It's not the gore anymore that draws me to those films. That was something that drew me to those films in my 20s, and what a way to catch you too, by the way. What a hook to get into a message, which is you just make the goriest fucking film you can ever, make, and then it catches all these people that normally would not go to a heavy-handed message movie, and then while they're watching people's heads explode and, arms get ripped off, then you slip in there, here's some stuff about the government industrial complex, and here's consumerism, and here's, like, social identity kinda stuff. It's so genius in a way. I don't even know if he meant to do it, but it's genius in almost every way. Um, but I'm hoping that, that people can see some of the parallels in some of these movies. I mean, Dawn of the Dead is definitely not the only movie that has talked about that. I think it's the best movie that's talked about that. I think it's the least heavy-handed movie that's talked about that. It's a fun movie at least with a message. It doesn't, like, beat you to death in the head with it. Um, and yeah, I think it's more relevant of a film now in 2024 as I'm doing this than I think it ever was back in that time period. So, yeah, um, also don't wanna excuse myself from this. Like I'm sitting on some sort of aloof kind of, uh, high chair about this whole thing because like clearly if you look around, like I'm in the middle of just this consumerism, um, and just buying all this shit and, physical media stuff. And, I don't think that, uh, you know, it's gotten to the point with me. I'm not in any kind of debt. I don't owe anybody anything like that. I think I have a pretty good handle on like that I buy like a lot of the things that I do. Um, I think I've gotten old enough to not really want to compete with people in terms of what I buy. But there's still some of that there. There's still a lot of that kind of like adrenaline rush thing when you get something new that I have to really keep a watch on, or that shit gets out of hand quick. You're on like sites buying shit that you don't need, man. Like you'll never need, and you don't even know why you're buying. And hopefully you get maybe a better understanding of why you're buying it now. Generally, you're not buying it to own that thing. You're buying it for the feeling that it gives you, or the feeling that is associated with it. So I don't know. Maybe I'm completely full of shit, but I don't think I'm completely full of shit. I think there's definitely some truth to this stuff. But um yeah, that's it.
I'd like to tell people to thumbs up the video, Uncle Bill.
Would you?
Yes. Thumbs it up with violence and fury and just love everything about it.
You hit the heart button, then you hit the ass button, then you hit the go fuck yourself button. Follow that up with the I don't give a shit button.
There's all kinds of wonderful shirts over at shop.deadpit.com. Simply the best horror shirts. On TeePublic, there are others, but they all suck. You can get some Dead Pit Radio shirts. You can get Last South on the Left. The Hills Have Eyes. Texas Chainsaw. Oh, wait, you can't say Texas Chainsaw. All kinds of shirts, folks. You're gonna love them. Shop.deadpit.com.
Special thanks goes out to our supporters on Patreon. Do you know what kind of stuff you can get on Patreon, Uncle Bill, starting at only $1 a month?
What's that?
Access to every Dead Pit show since 2005. We got almost 200 fan commentaries that we've done over the decades.
We have a literal jukebox full of songs and thousands of reviews. I don't even know how many shows are up on there now that we've done over the years.
Hundreds of thousands.
You need to figure this out now and subscribe to us on Patreon and YouTube and Instagram and help us to 1 million. The road to 1 million subscribers starts today.
So deadpitonpatreon.com. Join today. Tiers start at only $1, but I'd recommend at least the $10 tier.
You can do 50. The stock market's crashing around us, folks, but send us money.